Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. Welcome to Arba'een Reflections. Today's episode is on handling conflict. Many times in our communities, we have disagreements and we have ikhtilaf, difference of opinion. We look at issues quite differently, but this often escalates to the level of conflict. And there is some reason why it gets there. And in today's discussion, we want to know, what should we change? What can we change in our own behavior, our own conduct? That when we look at issues and look at people, we see adversaries, we see enemies, we see oppositions and confrontation. How do we change this approach? And how do we look at the community in a way that we are working towards unity amongst one another and amongst other faiths and other religions, rather than looking to pick holes in one another, be it ideologically or spiritually? Now, in order to have this discussion, we are joined by two great guests, and we have a very fascinating discussion. First, we have Sheikh Vinay Khetia, who is currently in Canada, in Toronto, who he has written at extensive length, from the Hausa and lectures as well. He brings a very good approach with experience in the community that he has experienced, and he discusses how we can find practical tips from this by using ulama's examples. It's a very great perspective. And we have Sayyid Bilal Rizvi. Sayyid Bilal, who is currently in Texas and a student of the Hausa as well. Sayyid Bilal also offers us a very refreshing and encouraging approach towards things like social media and towards things like speaking in a very practical and useful way, and using the knowledge and traditions of HalfBaked in a presentation which hits the heart. So we have a dialogue which I'm very excited to share with you. And it's a very important topic. So again, how can we find the root of our disagreements and change them into the source of our unity? Okay, so one of the issues which we have facing our communities generally, and also our communities at large, is the issue of disagreements and conflict, and whether or not we can deal with disagreements effectively to stop them from becoming conflicts which get in the way. Question to you, Sayyidina. It seems like disagreements are quite normal and a natural part of life, but so should the solutions to these disagreements as well be. How do you think we should go about understanding this issue?
First and foremost, you made an important point that disagreements are something which is natural, and disagreements, to a certain extent, if we understand them, can be something positive. Because no two people think alike. Everyone has a natural constitution. And in this sense, you can benefit from the viewpoint of another individual. Another individual might have an aptitude for a particular subject that you don't have an aptitude for. For example, in relation to the community, somebody may have a vision of outreach for the community, and that may not be my strong suit. My strong suit may be to organize the community internally. So in this sense, you find people can benefit from one another. Imam Ali would say that, to take consultation from another individual is in reality like joining the intellect with that individual. So this is the first point, that disagreements in and of themselves are not something which is negative, but they are something which is quite natural. But the problem comes up is, how do we approach disagreements? And over here, I think there is a very important teaching which we find from the traditions of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, from the Prophet of God, and that is to recognize the rights of other individuals. That at the very minimum level, when it comes to another human being, you deal with them with insaf and justice. But that's the bare minimum right. After that, when you come to another level, you have the level of ihsan and benevolence. But when it comes to the mu'mineen, we have even another higher level, and that is the level of ithar and self-sacrifice, or true altruism in the truest sense. So in this manner, the point I'm trying to make over here is that we need to be cognizant of the rights of other individuals, and we need to see that where is it that we can go above and beyond to try to understand the other side, and from that have a useful discussion. And oftentimes we see that when there are disputes within our community, that at the first level, we don't even understand what the other side is saying, and we're ready to dispute and argue with them. When you look in classical Islamic society, when you would have discussion and debate, the first thing that would happen in this sort of discussion is that you would state the argument of the opponent to the satisfaction of the opponent. But over here, I'm not using that example to show that there's two opposing sides or they're, in that sense. But when you're working towards a common goal, it starts with understanding, and really it starts with our approach to disagreements. And Sheikhna can shed more light if he has anything insightful to add on the subject.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think that an important point to add here, in my experience, of dealing with these sorts of issues for the past, 10, 15 years or so at least, is often there's confusions, I find, when disagreements come about, they're on the basis of confusion, that people draw red lines in the sand that aren't actually red lines. They don't revolve around issues of halal and wajib, or haram and wajib, or they don't revolve around issues that are really, truly meaningful, burning ethical issues of our age, of our time. And in those cases, we see in the adab, in the traditions dealing with the adab of ikhtilaf, it's better just to give the other party what they want. If it's not a matter of dealing with the rida of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the sakhat or the ghadab of Allah azza wa jal, then what is the harm in giving the party, or at least in meeting the other party halfway? I mean, and this is where the perspective of the mu'min, the one who has iman in Allah azza wa jal, and in the traditions of Ahlul Bayt, understand the bigger picture, the broader picture, right? That, is anyone going to go to hell over this? That's a question to ask, right? Or is this going to bring about the displeasure of the imam of the time with the community? I mean, so we have to be very careful in who makes these determinations. And if these determinations are made on what foundation and what manhaj and what method is such a grand or a profound kind of ethical red line drawn, right? And who draws it? So this is an epistemological issue as well, right? The epistemology of disagreement, or the epistemological foundation of the disagreement itself, that is worth being an actual ikhtilaf and disagreement between people that's going to cause fights and disunity. It should never cause fights, but unfortunately it sometimes does. Religion can be quite emotional. That's the nature of it. It's you're dealing with afterlife and infinity and all these other things. So naturally, tensions can rise, and flare, and things can flare up. But the question is it worth it at the end of the day if it doesn't apply to something that is a serious ethical issue? And then the other question is, who determines what that ethical issue is? And on what foundation is that determined? On what basis? So I think that this is a kind of question to ask when dealing, this is a question that I often ask disagreeing parties when they come to see me, whether they be in a marriage, whether it be in a community, whether it be even between, different scholars sometimes, if there is, on what foundation is that disagreement, where is it coming from?
So on the first point, so let's deal with it systematically. People are not taking their positions based on a consistent epistemology of how they measure reactions and actions and reactions with one another. There is a problem in how we are analyzing one another. People don't develop these kind of epistemologies in the way that they should. Sayyidina, when a person's looking at an issue with fresh eyes, what considerations should they bring in order to not judge too quickly or too harshly? What is a neutral approach to have when disagreements come towards you?
I mean, the first thing which Sheikh Vinay so excellently mentioned is that you look at what is the issue being discussed. Is it even worth it for us to be having a huge conflict over such an issue? But after that, after the first level of having this issue, let's say we deem that it is an issue that's substantial. The second level of dealing with this issue is asking ourselves, who is qualified to arbitrate in such a manner? Oftentimes, it comes down to the arbitrator. That is the arbitrator an individual who is respectable by both parties, or is the arbitrator at a second level qualified to deal with an issue as well? And oftentimes in the communities, when we have an issue of religious conflict, instead of going towards the qualified scholars to have their view and their input and their solutions to the problem, we take it upon our shoulders and we brush them off towards the side. So this is the first level, to see the value of the issue. The second level is to see who is able to solve that issue. But at the third level, it's important for us to examine what our approach should be as well. It's not always that I need to go out and tell somebody that they're doing something wrong. Oftentimes, if I'm nitpicking on every little thing, it may push the other party even farther away. We say we have to pick our battles oftentimes, but even when you go towards the battle, it's how are you approaching it? The famous verse, which, I know you wanted to bring up the question, but I'll bring up the verse, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'idati al hasana," that call to the path of your Lord with wisdom and, and admonishing, which is something which is positive and has wisdom within it. It really goes down to the approach of how we're coming towards the issue. I mean, we've all heard the famous story of Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain as children, when that man who was performing wudu incorrectly. Even Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain, they don't go towards that man and say, "Man, you're performing your wudu wrong." They go to that man, they say, "Which one of us is performing wudu incorrectly?" And when that man, he sees that they're performing it in the same way, that man, he recognizes that I was the one at fault and they're the ones who are performing it correctly. So after we've identified the issue, after we've seen who is qualified to deal with the issue, we really need to ask ourselves, is that how are we going to approach it? It's not, I just need to fire a shot immediately. It's about how I come towards it as well.
Yeah, the reason why I like this verse is because it reminds me that no matter what, right, you may be right, but how you communicate an issue is where you gain the solution. It's not enough to just be right anymore. Mu'adatul hasana means you choose the right strategy to implement what you think is right. I like the example you mentioned about Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain. Sheikhna, do you see in Ahl al-Bayt models for how we should deal with disagreements or deal with conflict in the way that was just mentioned?
Yeah, I think that, we could see the Ahl al-Bayt were always, using, or in many cases among their companions, they would use these as teaching moments for them, right? They would use it as a moment to educate their companions or educate the people around them about why perhaps they're not seeing things correctly. It wouldn't always be in a sense of saying, well, you're wrong and you're going to hell, but this is why we're saying what we're saying. This is the philosophy of what we're saying. It's a teaching moment, an instructional moment, which we see among the Ahlul Bayt. And even at the time of the Prophet, I mean, let's go back to the time of the Prophet, because he had a state that he was governing, and he was consulting with people, right? He was engaging in shura with people about different things. Again, because not every single matter necessarily pertained to an issue that would either send us to heaven forever or to hell forever, right? They weren't all burning issues like that, right? Some of them had to do with strategy and war, or whatever it is, some social issues of which there was consultation, in which they were taking people's objectives into consideration before rendering a judgment. Of course, a judgment is the ma'asum's always and no one else's, and that is, no one can ever be compared to the ma'asum in this regard. But we see in the life of the Prophet this consultation. We see in the life of the Middle Mu'mineen this consultation with people like Abdullah ibn Abbas and the people around him that he's discussing issues with. Now, of course, the final decision is with him, and sometimes they would not even see eye to eye with him on certain issues. For example, whether to remove Muawiyah from the governorship in Damascus, Abdullah bin Abbas tells the Middle Mu'mineen that, my advice to you is that you remove him, or that rather that you don't remove him, afwan, that you don't remove him, leave him where he is, you know, because he's going to cause problems for us later. So this is what my viewpoint is, right? And Mullah, how does he answer him? It's very beautiful how he answers him. Mullah Amir al-Mu'mineen answers him by saying, you're right. He first affirms him. He says, there's a point in what you've brought up. He doesn't just completely slam Abdullah bin Abbas and say, basically, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm the boss in town. You know, who are you to give me advice? You know, so on and so forth. But there's another point I'm going to come to here. But he answers, he says, as for what you've mentioned with regards to the dunya, there is salah in it. There is goodness in what you've mentioned as for the, you know, the benefit of the dunya. But I'm looking at it from X, Y, Z. This is how I'm viewing the situation. Obviously, the view of Imam al-Mu'mineen is the only view and the final view. But look at how he deals with Abdullah ibn Abbas. Despite the fact that it's clear that Abdullah ibn Abbas had a different perspective from Imam al-Mu'mineen on this very particular issue. And he did not feel shy to mention to his Mawla and his master and his Imam that this is what I think. Now, of course, once Imam al-Mu'mineen made that decision, complete submission to the Imam, without any doubt. So that's an important point. So it was an instructional moment. Number two, it was dealt with by affirming the other person. That, you know what, I see where you're coming from here. There's empathy. There's a sense of sensitivity towards the other person's, the legitimacy of the other person's points. But this is what my perspective is on the issue. This is how I'm looking at it. Secondly, of course, Abdullah bin Abbas was a person of knowledge who had a right to an opinion, who had a right to a viewpoint. Not everybody has a right to a viewpoint on every issue. Abdullah bin Abbas was a person of ilm and ma'rifat. Okay? He was someone that Amir al-Mu'mineen respected. He was somebody that formed part of the inner circle of Amir al-Mu'mineen, right? As well as among his advisors and then his governor later on in Basra, right? So, you know, this was, Amir al-Mu'mineen took this, took his viewpoints also from the perspective that he had a right to a viewpoint. Not everyone has a right to a viewpoint, just whatever you think you're going to say. So we have a right to agree to disagree. No, there's not always a right to agree to disagree on everything. It has to be from a sound epistemological standpoint, right? And there has to be a certain congruence or compatibility between the two people discussing. Right? Abdullah bin Abbas understands who the person is that he's speaking to. Amir al-Mu'mineen knows this is my student and my companion. Right? So they can engage in a beautiful dialogue, of course, with one being above the other, right? So these are some points to take into consideration from the life of A'immah.
Sayyidina, thoughts?
No, I think the point about empathy and understanding the viewpoint of another individual is a very important point which was mentioned. Because really, you know, another point from the traditions of Ahlul Bayt that we see when it comes to situations where there are disagreements, and in particular those disagreements have caused a form of a rift, is that we really see that the traditions imply a sense of proactivity. In particularly in the realm of reconciling. There's one thing to approach to conflict, but let's say a conflict has already happened. Then when tensions run high, what does a person do in this situation? And we see different traditions which speak about a level of proactivity. For example, you know, there is high praise for the person who seeks to build a relationship with the one who has cut off a relationship with him. We see traditions to the extent that say that, you know, greater than 1 year of recommended prayer and fasting is to reconcile two groups of believers, even to the extent that if there are two groups of believers in conflict, lying is something which is seen negatively morally. But if a lie can bring two groups together in particular situations, this is seen as one of the exceptions. So there's a great emphasis that once again you understand the other side. We see from the example that Sheikh Vinay mentioned with Ibn Abbas and Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, that despite the Imam being ma'asum, he doesn't go and he doesn't immediately say to Ibn al-Abbas, you're wrong, even though we believe that the ilm of the Imam is the ilm of the Imam. But we, as people who are fallibles, whose knowledge has holes within it, we oftentimes we go and we take that shot. But we see, for example, there's something called ikhtilaf al-ilmi, that there is a intellectual disagreement. We see scholars who spent their lives studying a subject for 40, 50 years, that they'll mention a disagreement they have with another scholar, but at the end of their books, they'll say, Wallahu al-a'lam, God knows best. But oftentimes when it comes to us, we may not even have a grasp of an issue, but we speak as if we're the final authority on that issue. Imam Ali, in his famous letter to Malik al-Ashtar in Nahj al-Balagha, letter 51, if I remember the number correctly, Imam Ali in that letter says that do not say to anyone that I am an authority, obey me, just for the sake of this authority, for it engenders confusion within the person and it could be harmful for his religion as well. So there is a way that you speak to other individuals, and that way of speaking starts with understanding the other side.
Yeah, this is a beautiful point. And in the same vein of what Sheikh Vinay said, it's as if the Ma'sum are always like this. Despite the ilm that they have, they're always willing to make an issue available for consultation amongst their companions. Whether it's the example you mentioned, whether it's the Holy Prophet discussing battle strategy with others, whether it's Abu Abdullah going on his journey towards Karbala, asking people around him, is your advice? What do you think I should do? And listening to them. But we are not like this. So it makes me wonder, is this a rational issue or a spiritual issue? Is it that we are not like this because our minds are not, operating in the way they should? Or is it our hearts which are preventing us from having this understanding? Sheikh, is that a good way of understanding? Is it a rational or spiritual issue? Or what is the heart of the matter?
The heart of the matter. I think the Quran points us to the direction of the hearts as well, right? That the people who have an illness in their heart seek disputes. They just love arguing, disputing with people, having big disputes and arguments, especially بغير علم, as the Quran says. They argue about things without knowledge about them. They discuss about things without knowledge. They take position on issues without knowledge, first of all, right? And you'll find people who take positions, strong positions on issues that they have not fully grasped, as Sayyid just mentioned. This is a malady of the heart. It's a spiritual malady. It's a spiritual sickness. And we seek refuge in Allah from this illness. And this is one of the ways that shaitan can sow fitna and disagreement among the mu'mineen. Well, not disagreement, but fitna and fasad and chaos and anarchy among the mu'mineen. And we see this today, especially in the usage of social media and social media platforms, that people are using these as religious pulpits, largely by people who really don't know much about the subject. Maybe they read a little bit at home, read a couple of hadith, maybe they even know Arabic because they may be born Arab, or they just took an introductory course in university, or maybe spent a year or two doing Arabic abroad, and all of a sudden they start quoting from books that they themselves have not understood the entire context. And maybe sometimes they're not even given a position on the actual pulpit in a mosque, but you don't need that anymore. Obviously, you can just use social media or your own YouTube channel or whatever it is you want to be to become a kind of overnight celebrity, especially by claiming to disagree with the jumhur, with the predominant or preponderant viewpoint among the fuqaha and mujtahideen, without first kind of understanding those issues at a deeper level. I'll just give you an example. One of my teachers in Najaf, which I think Sayyid might have met him before. I know Sheikh Imam Hussain al-Muballigh.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, he studied for about 50 years in the Hawza. He passed away not long ago, rahimahullah. He was a student of Sheikh Asif Mohsin for many, many years. His father was a wakil of Sayyid al-Khou'i. And he was one of the writers of the Taqrirat of Sheikh Muhammad Hassan Jawahiri. And, and he told me a couple of years ago something very interesting. He says that it is after 40 years that he began distinguishing very openly and clearly between the Ba'ath al-Kharij of Sayyid Ali Subzawari and Sheikh al-Jawahiri, that he would sit with me and opine with me on why he feels, for example, Sheikh al-Jawahiri is stronger in this point from Sayyid Ali Subzawari. Both of them are, of course, mujtahideen. And he said that, but that's after 40 years when I established my manhaj, or after many years, you say. So he told me, the first thing you need to do is be solid in what is your manhaj? What is your epistemology? And that takes years to solidify. Years, and it's tawfiq as well. When you understand what your epistemology is, your epistemological foundation, yeah, disagree. That's the whole point, no problem. And then even then it's done with such love and respect and such that you wouldn't even call it a disagreement. You'd kind of call it a conversation more than a disagreement, although that's what it is.
Muhavara as opposed to mujadala, which
exactly, right? And but today we've lost that respect. We've lost that decorum. We've lost that comportment in disagreement. And unfortunately, I think the internet has been the biggest curse for this community in that regard, for the Muslim community. Because people who otherwise really don't deserve any position of authority in the community have been given authority very often. Well, not being given authority, they just claim it themselves using the internet. And this goes for all religious traditions or whatever it is, And the mu'mineen should be aware of that. And we should understand the difference between the two. And I think that believers can see the difference, especially in the adab, in the comportment, in the use of certain words, in the understanding. Inshallah, I think mu'mineen are intelligent in this regard.
So for this example of social media, the solution would be developing a system of e-ethics or virtual ethics by which the individual, before they even touch their phone, believes in. And then when they now start to confront information, they apply it to the information they receive. Is that a fair enough conclusion?
Yeah, I think every person should think before they speak, just like they should think before they type, right? I mean, they should, ask themselves, am I seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this post or through this video I'm making or through this tweet or Instagram or whatever I'm doing? But unfortunately, very often the ikhtilaf here, or intentional, purposeful ikhtilaf by those who are not qualified in any serious way to do that on religious matters, it's perhaps a matter of the nafs more than it is of the intellect, right? It's a matter of showing that, look, I've learned Arabic, or I've learned Persian, I know this hadith, I know this ayat of Quran so well. I just finished reading my first tafsir of the Quran. I don't know what it is, but people get very excited to do these things very early on in their lives. And they start spewing their opinions about things of which they don't have a complete firm grasp on. And I remember my own teachers, I think it was after about maybe 10 years that my teacher said, okay, yeah, you know what, maybe you can share your viewpoint on this particular issue, for example. And even that's with my teacher. That's not necessarily sitting on a pulpit somewhere. Because there has to be respect for that. Because when it comes out, it should be such that it's fully cooked. As Sayyid Rizvi says very often, he says these are half-baked. It's still got to go in the oven. You still have time to cook. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with it being half-baked. It's in the process. Alhamdulillah. No, very good. But is social media the platform for that, right? I think it's just common sense. People need to use their common sense, and they need to ask themselves, how much of this is about fame? How much of this is about being holier than thou? How much of this is about being self-righteous and somehow thinking that I'm the solution for Islam? That I'm the solution. أنا كتبت هذا. I wrote this. I did this. I'm going to show them my 2 years or 3-year diploma degree. I'm going to demonstrate to the world that, you know, those who have studied 30, 40, 50 years, they don't know anything. I've read this book, I know. It's not how it works, you know. It's completely the antithetical, like the opposite approach to Islamic spirituality. Right? It should be, it's a bala azim to be someone who's mashhur, who's well known. Bala azim, great bala and mas'uliyah on someone's neck and shoulder. That every syllable that comes from their mouth will be held accountable for in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they approach it from that perspective, perhaps there would be a little bit less fitna and fasad.
But the problem then is, even though this problem comes from their lack of spirituality, the platform of social media rewards this kind of behavior. You know, a half-baked idea is immediate.
Don't you get money for like the number of views or something, if I'm not correct, on like YouTube or something?
Do we, or do people?
I don't think we're going to get those many views. I mean, like anybody, like you, it's also monetized, right?
Yeah, you have this thing of clout where the more online activity, the more someone can monetize. And so it rewards them to do that, which invites money rather than is productive dialogue. So half-baked ideas are immediate ideas, get them out there. And also adversarial opinions, they track very well amongst people online.
Publicity is good publicity in today's world, and that's really what it is. That if you want to be popular, just go and say something controversial and you'll gain your popularity.
Yeah.
And it's quite unfortunate. You know, as Sheikh mentioned, that a lot of the times it's just feeding the nafs of a human being. And it's more that, you know, it's a demonstration, oh, I know these few things and I want to say them. That's why we say that sometimes being completely ignorant is better than knowing a little bit. Because the person who's completely ignorant, then he can't deceive anyone. You know, people see right through that individual. But when somebody knows a few fancy terms, particularly in the Arabic language, then he's able to, you know, get around with some things. And it's quite unfortunate.
Do you think this platform of social media can be used, like, can we change these debates for the better, or are they just utterly compromised?
My personal opinion, and this is my personal opinion, I don't find debates on social media particularly useful. Because, you know, when it comes to communication, half of it is your words, half of it is your body language, it is your facial expressions. And what happens on social media, people who are not confrontational people, oftentimes, they get very confrontational on social media because it almost ends up being an alter ego or an alter personality. But if those people were having a discussion in person, because the other facets and elements of communication are there, they're often able to have a more fruitful discussion. You know, things are not just lost in typing, as we say. You know, there's a tone of the voice. There is a, you know, the facial structure, the facial, you know, expression of a person. All of these things, they go a long way in discussion. But, you know, that's just my personal thought. I haven't seen many fruitful discussions on social media, but if Sheikh Vinay has, he can enlighten us on that.
Sheikh, have you?
Amongst scholars, some ulama, sometimes,
you know, amongst a group of specialists, for example.
Yeah. For example, like amongst specialists, sometimes we'll be having a conversation about a particular issue, and even then, you see how the adab, how it's written with such respect and adoration for the other person. Adoration, really, for the other. Like you're showing love and adoration to the person that you are politely disagreeing with. It's so beautiful. Like, it's so beautiful. You see the way ulama writes. True ulama, sidqan wa haqqan. I'm not talking about the fly by the night, you know, drive-through ones, right? I'm talking about real scholars, you know, people who have been through the spiritual tarbiyah, not only of learning books, but also the spiritual tarbiyah of ikhtibar and tests and bala and all these things in their life, right? Their approach to life is different, you know, whether they be our female ulama or male ulama, right? Either, you know, from either group, right? MashaAllah, because it's not only limited to males. But that's as Sayyid, you know, kind of mentioned, that's a very small group of people, very limited group, and that's a limited circle, and you know, and even those discussions, I have advised some of my brothers sometimes, or sisters, to even avoid those being public discussions. Like just like a random post, like you may have like 2,000 friends, but you're discussing with scholars about something. It doesn't always come across the right way. Not everyone might be understanding the context of that conversation, of that disagreement there, right? All they'll do is they'll just come out of there and say, oh, wow, you know, these guys can't even agree on the Quran. Oh my God, what's wrong with them? How many times I've heard Mu'mineen come and say, these ulama can't even agree on the verse of the Quran, its meaning, because they don't understand. Like it's not their field. They don't understand that there is an agreement on the zahir aspect of it, maybe, but not on its inner. But then now you got to explain the zahir and the batin, the tafsir and the ta'wil and all of this, and the bridge between the two of them and all the qawaid. You see, so, but yes, there is a place for that discussion among people that will act respectful and, you know, and approach it in a respectful way. Well, that's very, very far and few between and very limited. Almost zero, I would say, nearly. And there's not much useful in, I mean, to be honest, the only reason I even have social media today is because I'm told I have to. Because I'm in a public position, I'm a public figure running a community, you know, and, you know, not only like, it's not a matter like I'm appointed to a position, to a public position. It's not about me being proclaimed as a public, but I'm appointed to a position of public authority and trust. So for that reason, I guess it's useful for Mu'mineen to see what the activities are, you know, whatever. I mean, I don't know, even that I'm not comfortable with, but it is what it is, right? Unfortunately, to a certain extent for me. But if I could get away with it, from it, I would. Like, I don't post much on Instagram, very rarely, although that might be changing soon. Again, at the advice of other people, of, you know, people who, you know, who, anyways, and I don't post that much. I'm not like crazy. Like, I don't even remember the last time I ever posted anything on Facebook. I'll retweet, like Sayyid Rizvi's lectures, or Sheikh Shamali's lectures, Sheikh Bahmanpur, or something like that. If I see something really nice and really valuable in it, you know, like I'll repost it, but not of my own. Like, look me, way, I'm such a great scholar, I'm doing this today. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, I want to be important. Everybody look at me and give me a like so I can feel good about myself, right? Although I don't know if that will affect the number of my likes, whether Sahib al-Zaman is Ravi with me or not on that basis, I'm not sure, you know, but, and especially if I'm going to do a disagreement, I mean, then it's like, then as you said, these things, they get you so much more traction, right? I mean, in fact, I was actually told by somebody, Sheikh, you know, why don't you just disagree with the big scholars every now and then? Just say something like, you know, just come out and say something like, on the basis of your research or whatever, your PhD or one of your articles you've written, and just choose the very minority opinion, the shadh ra'i, the shadh opinion from it, the nadir opinion from the 6 physicians, of which you know 5 are predominant, 3 are predominant among qudama mutaakhirin, right? And just choose the one guy, you know, in like the 3rd century, like Ibn Junayd, or some guy from that period who said something really controversial. We'll get so much traction on social media. We can make you so famous. We can make you so popular. You know, maybe you'll even get invited to bigger centers next year. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. More people have actually approached me and told me that my social media approach is too conservative, because you're not marketing yourself in a way that will, as you mentioned, bring traction, and you can monetize those things then, you know, and la ilaha illallah. I mean, na'udhu billah. Yeah, this is, I mean, what is this if not even nafsani? I think it's shaitani. I mean, this very well could be dajjalic to a certain extent. Because what is dajjala, right, is to present like falsehood as truth, right? Right, and this amama and this libas now literally becomes a libas of what, like shaitan or something? It's like, you know, it's like people walking on their heads with their legs in the air down the street. So that's how disagreement, you know, can be used, unfortunately. Yeah.
In this climate of people desiring extremity and disagreement and confrontation, is it hard to stay rational, hard to stay moderate when there are these forces pulling you, even as a speaker or just as a person with views? Is it hard to stay in the middle ground on issues?
No, I just, you need to be grounded, you know, in what your goals are and what your intentions are. And that's the number one thing. If your intentions become to please the people or to, you know, gain fame or some sort of, you know, popularity, then yeah, you may find yourself in a predicament where you are willing to go and find the conflict or even promote conflict from the mimbar of Rasulullah, which is very unfortunate, you know, because the goals of the pulpit at one level is to unite the community as well, and is to instill strength within the beliefs and the faith of the mu'mineen. So yeah, I mean, somebody hypothetically could find themselves in such a situation, but one really needs to be grounded in what his intention is, why he's doing what he's doing. And that's something which will drive you forward. And as Sheikh mentioned, that, you know, popularity really is a test. Fame is a test. You know, our scholars and our urafa, they would go to great lengths to hide what their deeds were. You know, it wasn't, they weren't publicizing every single thing they did, that, you know, look at me, I read 1,000 units of prayer last night, let me go tweet it. Or, you know, I spent this many years writing this book, let me go tweet it. It wasn't the case. You know, one of my teachers, I remember I really liked to quote, and I shared it, you know, in a lecture afterwards, and he rebuked me. He said that, why, were you learning that just to absorb it, or were you learning it just to spew it or to say it? So these are very important points, and we really need to constantly ask ourselves, it really is jihad an-nafs. You know, to be in the public is jihad an-nafs, because naturally a human being, you do gain some sort of inclination when you have thousands of people liking your viewpoints and thousands of people in the crowd. But to stay humble, to stay pure in your intention, is really a constant struggle. And once a person stops making that struggle, then there's no really, you know, there's no depths to the downfall a person can have.
The mimbar of Abu Abdullah, which you mentioned, which is often abused and used for disunity and disagreement, you said it's very close to unity, and it's one of the functions of the mimbar. What is the link between the scholar on the pulpit and unity in the community?
Number one, you need to have wisdom in how you are approaching the community that you go to. Not every single discussion is for every community. What may benefit one community may not necessarily benefit another community as much. But as a public figure, as a scholar, as a speaker, there is a form of respect which the community that does give to you. And when that respect is coming, if you're using the position that you have to, you know, pick favorites amongst the community, or to incite the community farther, and that may be for your own gain, or you may not have any gain within that situation, or it may just be you want to throw your own 2 cents into the situation, as people often like to do. And at the end of the day, what happens is that speaker, he ends up leaving, and then the community is left dealing with the issue. So these are all different aspects. And when you are, especially, you know, when it comes to the month of Muharram, when it comes to the majlis of Imam Hussain, you know, it is the wilayah of HalfBaked alayhim as-salam which brings us together. And that's really what we need to ask ourselves. Is this issue, is this ikhtilaf, is this dispute worth me breaking my relationship with my brother or sister in wilayah of HalfBaked alayhim as-salam? You know, I remember they asked Marhum Ayatollah Al-Khuy a question. And they asked him that, you know, when a person passes away and you go around the body, you say, Allahumma inna la na'lamu minhu illa khair. Or if it's a female, you say, minha illa khair, that I know nothing from this person except for good. Or I know nothing except from him or her except for good. They said, what if you knew the person? What if he was a sinner? You know, what do you do in this situation? He said, what you're testifying to is the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam over here. You know, on one side, we do have the tradition that when the believers cover the faults of other believers, Allah says, I'm Sattarul Uyub, I'm the one who conceals the faults. But this goes to show that when it comes to the brethren within the community, that they have a great right. And to establish this is something which is the job of everyone within the community. We saw the Prophet, when he comes to Medina, before he carries out any state action, he does what? He establishes ukhuwa and brotherhood so that there is a form of harmony. And it is through this harmony, or this social tawheed, as I'd like to call it, the community can continue to grow and it can reach out to different areas and fulfill its potential.
Ahsan Sayyidina. This kind of social unity, Sheikh.
Add one more point, not to, you know, cut you off. There
Yeah.
are, you know, there's a great emphasis in being in a community for a reason. You know, there is a great emphasis on the prayers in congregation for a reason, or for dua in congregation for a reason. And that very, you know, that social element is there, and that social element does bring the community together. And my apologies, you can continue the point you were making.
But that was the question. So I was going to say to the Sheikh, that feeling of being in the community, that's a very natural feeling of wanting to be in the group. It's very fitratan to be around people. And it seems like that impulse is being directed towards negativity when its natural home is unity. Sheikhna, in your experience, why do we have as much, like every community I hear about, they have this problem, that problem, that problem. Like, I haven't even heard of one area geographically which, like, they're okay, they don't have this issue, they don't have this problem, or they have no problems. Why does this keep happening to us when we have, as Sayyid mentioned, wilaya? Shouldn't that be enough?
No, because we're still human beings, right? Human beings have a nafs, they have an ego, and we're all sinners at the end of the day. So I wouldn't stand on as an individual on my high horse claiming that I'm better or perfect, or that other people are the problem. We're all human beings at the end of the day, and we are all in one way or another broken. And that is the reality of our life. We hope that, you know, through the intercession of Ahlul Bayt, Salamullahi alayhim, that we'll become whole at some point. Perhaps after our death, perhaps as we journey through the questions of Munkar and Nakir and entering our Barzakh. Allah knows best. But we're all broken in some way or another. So that Madinatul Fadila, you know, that, as Farabi would say, you know, that virtuous city, you know, that's what heaven is for at the end of the day. You know, as far as we're in dunya will be dunya. You know, even with the just rule, it'll still be dunya. It'll still be the world. People will still steal from each other and name each other and do things to each other, because the moment we forget Allah, the moment we are ghafil of Allah's haqq upon us, that in Allah kana alaykum raqiban, the moment we are heedless of that, of being in the state of muraqabah with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of His ever watching eye over us, we say what we want, we do what we want. And that includes someone that looks like me or doesn't look like me, or wearing clothes like I'm wearing or not wearing clothes. We're all human beings at the end of the day. The only ones that are protected from this by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, are the ma'asumeen at the end of the day. So we have to take every community as it comes. You know, one thing that I've come to lower my expectations. Not because I don't want people to rise up, but in the sense of sometimes we have to accept a certain level of religiosity, a certain level of attachment, and then say, okay, let's move from there. Let's not accept it as in the status quo, but in a sense, take people as they are with love. Bring them in with love, and then work with them, and then work on them, and then develop them, because that's how the Prophet treated people during his lifetime. And there's a difference between enemy of Ahlul Bayt and the enemy of Islam, and someone that's misguided or mistaken, or in need of some help. Two are different, right? So we will see these disagreements. We will see this fitna, in various communities. I don't think it will go away. But yes, we have to, at least the member should be used and must be used as a place to unite people with the love of Ahlul Bayt, with the submission to the Ahlul Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, to the Quran, and to marja'iyya. As Sayyid Sistani says, that one of the points that the that Ahlul Member should focus on, or among them, is marja'iyya and hawza ilmiya as being the secret and the sir behind the standing up and the support of this madhab, right? Yani bunyanuhu, the building of this madhab, right? And this is the kalam in the words of Sayyid Sistani, right? Damadilluhum, Samahat Sayyid al-Marja al-A'la. So, because this should be something of unity among the Shias. And if the member is being used by somebody to invoke disunity on this subject, then it is being used according to Samahat Sayyid Sistani. May Allah raise his rank. For the wrong reasons, or wrong would be a very light way of describing it. I mean that would be, but wrong at the very least.
Sayyidina, marja'iyya is a very powerful and should be a very unifying force amongst the people, as is wilaya, as is love of Ahlul Bayt. And yet these are the very things which are a source of contemporary disunity amongst many communities. Something just tells you love of Ahlul Bayt is stronger than any. It can, if used properly or discussed in the right language, this particular thing of love of Ahlul Bayt, it can solve the most heated discussions. Is this true in practice as well?
It's true, but as the Sheikh said, at the end of the day, we are human beings. And it does require vigilance and constant reminders. And one really needs to ask, as I was saying previously, that is this issue worth it? Is it worth me ruining my relationship with my brother or sister in wilaya over this issue? But at the end of the day, if you can look into the heart of that person and say that this person at the end of the day is a lover of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, or he's a lover of Sayyid al-Shuhada, without a doubt, that's a very powerful force to bring people together. If many people that, if you look in their friends groups, they don't have anything in common, but the only thing they'll have in common, for example, really is the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. But on the outward, on paper, they may be very different, individuals that if they were to meet on the street or on a college campus or at work someday, they wouldn't necessarily be, spending time together. But that's the beauty of the power of the wilaya of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and the love of Ahlul Bayt. And a form of tawalla is not only just to love Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, but a form of tawalla is to love those who love Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, whether at the higher level it's the close companions of Ahlul Bayt like Mitam Sammar and the rest of them, or at the very level is to recognize that your brother in faith has a right which is higher than just another human being. Every human being you deal with insaf. But when it comes to the brothers in wilaya, we say, as I mentioned in the beginning, we say that there is a right of itar. Itar really means that a person is willing to go above and beyond. We have traditions that in the when the Imam he returns, he'll establish such a society that one person will be able to reach into the pocket of another individual to suffice what his needs were. This goes to show at some level there will be a harmony. And this harmony is something which is important, that we lay the groundwork, and we do the best of our abilities to establish this harmony. Yes, at the end of the day, we are human beings. You know, the nafs is something which divides. A nafs is something which comes in between you and another person. But at the same time, it requires muraqabah, it requires constant vigilance, and it really is a journey in the truest sense. It's a lifelong journey, and one which we really need to get, started upon if we haven't started upon it by now.
Sheikh, now thoughts?
Yes, I mean, Sayyid explained it very well. Alhamdulillah, you know, that tawalla and love between us is also a love of commitment to the path of Ahlul Bayt. Right? So it's not enough to simply say that, oh, well, I love Imam Hussain and you love Imam Hussain. But I could love Imam Hussain, or someone else could love Imam Hussain and be, you know, at the same time, let's say, buying major stocks in Raytheon, right? Or in some massive weapons producing company, you know, and engaging in, you know, in practices that are obviously, you know, prohibited, right? You know, so with the love must also come a clear kind of pathway for giving good advice to one another or admonition. So it's not just let's all love and go into the sunset and everyone's just hunky-dory, you know, and it's this kind of moral relativism along with the love, right? You know, that, oh, well, I'm a good person and you're a good person. No. I may not be a good person, you may be good. That's not relative. That's defined by the sunnah of Allah and the Masini. That good life is defined. I may be being on my path to being a good person, but I have a long way to go. And you may be on the path to being a good person, but you have a long way to go as well. So we both must recognize that we're not necessarily good people in a true, fully developed sense of it. We have improvement, you see, and that requires humility. That requires profound tawab and humility to accept that. That each of us are not good in the full sense of the word just because we love. Just because we say, I love Muhammad wa Muhammad. These are the end are just da'awat, as the Quran says. They're just words that people claim from their tongues. That's all it is. Without the mawadda part, which is the devotion, the commitments, as Allama Tabatabai says about fi maqam al-amal, in the position of action, it's just words, right? So for example, the people who wrote to Imam Hussain alayhi salam from Kufa, if you were to read their letters, you would say who's a greater lover of Imam Hussain than them? We have no flag but you. The trees are shivering, awraqat al-ashjar, all these words they were saying, right? In the letters they were writing to Imam Hussain, yet they stood on the other side on the day of Khatba, on the day of Ashura. Those are all expressions of love. I'm not saying our love is false. I'm saying that love can be false. It can be false if at the same time I claim to love Imam Hussain alayhi salam and I'm peddling in, you know, in the distribution of something that is inappropriate and contributing to the facade in the society, right? So love is a unifying factor, providing we're real with one another as to what that love is. And we first recognize within ourselves the faults that we need to improve, you know. So that's my 2 cents.
More than 2 cents. This parable of the Kufans is such a useful reminder for us, because you're right, our words that we say and tweet and share and WhatsApp and all these things, like they become so emotive sometimes, and they're so like, Abba Abdullah, if you were here, like I would sacrifice everything for you and all these things. And it's just not true, because I wouldn't sacrifice a simple thing for him.
2 units of prayer.
What's that, Sayyid?
I said, in reality, we can't wake up in the morning to pray 2 units of prayer and we're ready to have our heads cut.
Why are our words so cheap? Why do we use them so irresponsibly like this?
Because we use them too much, brother. You know, we're actually not supposed to talk. There's a great, you know, I have a beautiful work only on the virtue of silence. But Ayatollah Madahiri, not Muntadhari, Madahiri. One of the great Urafa of Najaf al-Ashraf. I think he was originally from Isfahan. He was in Najaf in the turn of the century. And he was known for his silence. And the whole book, it's a manuscript actually, it's never been published, the book. It's a lithograph, it's a prep, it's an impression book. It's given to me, but it's very old. And the whole book is on silence. The fadl of silence and how to keep our mouths shut and learn to keep it shut, because that is what causes the biggest problems. You know, one of my teachers, and I love him so much, I don't want to say his name.
Don't remember Sayyid's story. Don't say his name
because he won't like it, so I won't say it. He's always silent, but not silent like when he'll answer questions, he'll speak, but if he has nothing to really contribute, he literally will sit in awkward silence, just looking. Okay, all right. What do you want now? I've already answered your question. I could ask that question a different way, and he'll tell me, I've already told you what I know of that subject. If I knew more, I would have said more. Why are you asking me the same question? This is now annoying me. Are you pushing me to comment about something about Sheikh Tusi that I don't know about, or that I'm not sure, and I may impunge his character? He says, what is wrong? Is that an illness in your heart? This is the level of ulama kiram, fadala. This is not the level of just people who just got verbal diarrhea and motor mouths. Just want to exercise mental gymnastics online, wherever they are, to show people, you know, the little flips and somersaults that they can do. And these are people who have written 100, 200, 300, 400 books. Okay, so it's not that they're saying this because they don't know. It's because they've understood the value of what knowledge is, the value of, you know, the significance of what it means to say, you know, this is what something could be or could not be, right? And you learn this, you know, I've learned this the hard way over 19 years in this field. Over 19 years now, almost 2 decades. I'm dating myself here a little bit, but almost 2 decades. And I've learned that lesson the hard way many times. Because we're so used to just talking and talking. It's exhausting. You know, sometimes it's good to just zip it and let other people talk. You know, one of my teachers always said to me that no one's gonna know that you're stupid if you keep your mouth shut. Just listen. Just listen and learn and soak in everything that's going around you and see, maybe, you know, I'm gonna learn something today. I don't wanna talk, I just wanna learn. I wanna come here to learn in this gathering. Let someone else talk. And I won't judge them. I'm here to learn from them, even if they be my junior. It doesn't matter, old, young. I'm here to learn. If we approach things from the perspective of wanting to learn as opposed to wanting to teach always, I think we'd have less problems. I think so. That's just my 2 cents.
I think it's beautiful. We began speaking about what can we do to solve disagreement, and we conclude by saying, just be silent. The value of silence is one of the solutions to this. And we are actually at the end of the discussion, but Sayyidina, because I want to give you last word on this. Silence is beautiful.
Sheikh is more worthy of the last word than I am.
He said his last line, which is, that's my 2 cents. So maybe we should respect the sign off, inshallah. Khair. I must thank both of you very much for taking part in this discussion. We pray the listeners can benefit and can take many of the practical tips you mentioned. We pray they can actually implement this in their lives and inshallah, and just be better at this problem, which if the individual can solve, the community can get better at generally. Thank you so much, both of you. I think we end inshallah with a salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This methodology of beginning with understanding and empathy and finding a solution based on your recognition of the other person comes from whether or not we know ourselves. And that is one of the most important conclusions of this discussion. Understanding yourself and the responsibility you have to your Lord, And seeing clearly helps you see others clearly. And yes, if we do have what are natural disagreements, which come from being human, there is a way of reconciliation which Islam has taught us works, using the knowledge of Ahlul, using the example, the many examples we mentioned. And for a contemporary angle, look at our scholars and the way they conduct themselves while they're in the middle of disagreements with love. Their disagreement on an issue does not affect their love for a person. And we pray that all of us can follow this because, of course, it leads to the all important goal of social unity. And we pray all of the listeners can, in your own situations where you do see disagreement and you do see conflict, we pray you can act to alleviate it in your own way, inshallah. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode of Arba'een Reflections.